So the devil uses the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life to try and get us away from the will of God and fall into our flesh and disobey God, rebel against God, and go our own way, because he knows that ultimately what will happen is if we go down that path, we'll be separated from God for all eternity without any hope. And that's Satan's purpose and plan and will for us. I want you to talk about the three great enemies of a Christian. The three great enemies of a Christian are the world that we live in, the world system that we live in. It's the flesh, our own desires, and Satan himself. And all three of these entities target the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life in some shape or form. And when we give in to that temptation or that lust or that desire, we sin. And again, sin, as the example of Eve, leads to separation from God. And in our case, people who choose to rebel against the Lord, rebel against his word, and go their own way, ultimately run the risk of, in fact, not the risk, the certainty of a separation from God for all eternity. But I think there's one thing I want to just talk about temptation here. If we look at Eve's case, if we read again Genesis chapter 3 verse 6, it's very, very key. It says, when she saw, all right, when the woman saw, and this is important because it shows that what we see, what we choose to focus on, can lead us or cause us to sin. What we choose to feast our eyes on, what we allow into our mind, into our spirit, through our eyes and our ears, can actually lead us to cause us to sin. What we allow into our eyes and our ears affects our minds and our hearts, and can make us either more like Christ or more like the world. There's no in-between about it. What we allow into our minds shapes our character, can either allow us to become more like Jesus if it's the word of God that we're focusing upon, or if it's the world, will make us become more like the world. So Genesis 3:6 says, and the woman saw. If we look at David, again, David was a man that was described as a man after God's own heart. This is a man who loved the Lord with all his heart. But if you read 2 Samuel chapter 11, we read the account of David. Basically, this is a man who was after God's own heart, a man who wanted to please the Lord and serve the Lord. And what happened to David? Well, effectively, he was one day at his house. He was out looking on the balcony. He saw a naked woman, Bathsheba, and then from there he fell into sin, committed adultery with her. Not only that, he conspired to have her husband Uriah killed. Ultimately, what then happened was David was found out, and the Lord exposed David. David repented. He went to the Lord, but the baby that was born from that relationship with Bathsheba, that baby died. But here's the interesting thing. The spark for this whole thing, the spark